You're listening to Medicinal Minutes with Megan Mazinga. This is Medicinal Minutes with Megan Mazingo, and today I have a friend here with me. We have already been giggling and having the best time just chatting. My name is Susan, and we have connected based on just healing through some pretty crazy stuff. Susan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's always great talking to you, and I'm very honored to hear your story and to giggle through this whole episode together, because laughter is a power source and it's a weapon, and I am 100% okay with releasing joy into this entire podcast. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So could you just tell us a little bit of maybe broad background as to your story? And a lot of people, every single person has struggles and trauma that they've lived through.
Yeah.
There's different levels of struggles, of trauma, and you have survived and been redeemed from so many deep traumas. So could you kind of give us a picture as to what that looks like for you?
Well, I definitely I could take it back to the beginning. I'm not going to share the deep stuff today because I feel like it's not the time for me to share, but I do want to share the basics of my story, because I'm hoping that it would help someone else to just hear. I'm still on my journey, and I feel like healing is a lifetime journey. It's not just you do it in a year and 6 weeks or in one time and then you're totally healed. Yeah. It's like there is layers upon layers. And I grew up in a home that my parents loved each other very much, and but my mom struggled with mental health. She struggled with a lot of depression, and had multiple diagnoses on her. She was in and out of the hospitals, and also dealt with addiction through my childhood. And because of that, it was a tough, my elementary years were some of the toughest years that even some of my memories coming back, I remember being rough. And I had a lot of family and friends that were praying for me, and I was starting to walk down a rough road probably at age 10, 11 years old. I started to get a little rebellious and acted more like an 18-year-old than a 10 or 11-year-old. And, I was invited to be involved in a passion play, which was a musical about Jesus, at a local teen center. And I loved music. I loved acting, and I was so excited. And it was through that experience that it wasn't someone preaching the gospel to me. It was the factor that the people there were different and they loved me. In elementary school, most of the kids was bullied. I was always the odd one because I was dealing with a lot of stuff. And even at that time, stuff I didn't remember. And I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that I didn't fit in and that there was some really heavy things happening. And it affected my schooling. It affected me socially. But when I got to the teen center, these people loved me and they treated me like family. And I was like, there's something different about them. And I remember there was an older teen girl there, and I remember saying, there's something different about you. Why do you act the way you act? And she says, it's because of Jesus. And, she shared some of her stories and just miracles that happened in her life. And I'm like, wow, he loves you that much. And, it was like, and then being in the play, I encountered him, and I had an encounter with Jesus at the cross, and just I knew that's what I wanted. It was like I had been so depressed and so a mess in my life, and I was about 12 when I gave my heart to the Lord. And through that time till my, adulthood, um, I hungered for him. I hungered for more because there was something deep that had been missing. And it was like an empty pit inside. And I knew I just needed more of Jesus. And um, in that hunger, I really grew in my walk, just being involved at the teen center there. And then when I met my husband, we started to get involved in helping at some churches. We kind of went through a couple different churches that we were involved doing youth ministry. Also, I led worship and prophetic ministry, just different things through the several decades of adulthood. I'm not going to say how many decades, but it just it was and there was a lot of experiences in those moments. And probably a couple years after I was married, I got I learned about inner healing and began to work with a couple that were like parents to me, like spiritual parents that really worked through some deeper trauma that I was aware of at the time, just from my childhood. And I felt like, oh, I'm doing a lot better, but I found I still was hitting walls in some areas. And it literally, I remember hearing, them talking about rebuke the devil and he'll flee, or when these voices would rise up, to rebuke them and command them to go, and that they would go. And I remember there were times where my anxiety and the heaviness in my heart, there would be days, like usually once or twice a week, where it was so heavy that I would hear these voices of doubt and anger, and like, they don't like you, you're never going to get through this. And I used to immediately think that was the enemy. I used to always think, well, that's the enemy speaking, and I'd rebuke it and command it to go, and it would continue to happen. And sometimes it got so overwhelming, I almost did something regretful. It would get bad. And but still through that time, I really was pursuing relationship with the Lord, because where I found the most peace and the most joy was when I encountered him. And I had some amazing encounters with the Lord. I would say probably from 2008 on, I'd start to have these visions and dreams. And a lot of it came through a season where we were trying to have children from 2001 to 2007. So we were really longing for children, and we were told we couldn't have children. And our church had a prayer room. So I would, one of the things they said is it was probably stress related and that I needed to reduce my stress. So we cut back on ministry stuff. I also ended up going part-time and trying to do my graphic design part-time freelance. And so I would work the mornings, and I usually would go straight from work to the prayer room at my church, and I would go in there and just soak in the Lord's presence, and I would spend time with him. And sometimes I would fall in that half sleep, half awake moments, and I'd have these amazing encounters with him. And every time that would happen, it was like something really deep and really powerful. And I remember I even began having dreams about other people, and the Lord would show me something, and then I'd feel like I needed to share it with them. And it ended up being something very important for them. And I mean, I remember one was about this little girl with a rose, and she was to give it to her mother or her grandmother, and the decision was hers. And she was kind of struggling between the two. And in the dream, her mother said, "It's okay. It's okay to give it to grandma." And she gave it to her grandma. And there was such peace and joy in this dream. And anyway, I shared that with the mother, and she started to weep. And she says, "I've been praying about it because she wants to go back to her grandmother's house." And it was like it brought a huge amount of peace in the situation and really helped out, But I'd have these amazing encounters. And then when I was during that time, I wanted to have, I was hungry for more, and I thought, that's if this love that I feel for him, the best way I can experience it is to actually be in his presence, to be with him, because I'm a very visual, and I'm feel, I see, I hear, I touch, that was what I longed for with the Lord. And I longed to be able to not just do it on his time, but when I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I started to learn. And I believe God connected me with people that I needed to be connected to learn how to hear and to see and to understand those things. And it was really awesome because I had been experiencing it, but I learned how to do it on my own. And it was amazing. But what I discovered was, with that came a level of maturity that I needed to grow up in. Because when you begin to see and hear in the spirit realm, not just when the Lord's doing it, but just aware of it, it opens up things that you're going to see other things. And understanding that and learning to discern that is so important. And I didn't really have people in my life at that time to guide me, but God put them in my life, And at one point, I hit a wall because there was some deception that happened in my life. And I thought I was experiencing something that was the real Jesus, and it wasn't. And when that happened, it broke my heart to the point that I wanted to throw every single encounter I had with him away, And I had some amazing encounters with him. And I was like, I was so angry because I was like, "God, I thought this was you and this wasn't you. How can you, how can you do this to me, God?" And I got angry because I'm like, I wanted to know that for sure it was you, and I didn't, And, in that moment, the Lord, it took some time, but he began to open up some things to help me to see what was going on. And the one thing I realized is that sometimes we have deep wounds in us, and it literally can be like a filter or like a screen that taints our spiritual eyes and our spiritual ears and how we feel about things. And it's like when we are already partially open to those things and experiencing those things, and then something else, we begin to pursue that more. It's like when we are aware of the spirit realm, it's like there are things in the spirit realm that are aware of us. Yeah. And if there's open doors, there's things in our lives that are not cleaned up. It's like, ooh, that's a way to get in.
I love that you're mentioning open doors, and even, I mean, like, shoot, you've said a whole lot of nuggets. Yeah. And I want to unpack a lot of what you said. So I'm actually going to go back to when you were saying how rebuke the devil and he'll flee from you. Yeah. That's absolute truth. But sometimes we're rebuking things that are not the devil.
Yes.
Especially with people who have lots of layers of wounds that are filtering their eyes,
Yes.
their spiritual eyes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
You're on this journey and you're realizing that you're rebuking the devil. Obviously, these voices are not fleeing from you. So
No.
tell us about that. What is the journey there for our listeners who might not know what you're talking about?
So this takes me forward to about 2015. I was having all these encounters with God, and I had began blogging about him, sharing about him in my blog, Mystic Mama Storm, and I was talking about things that God was showing me. And a good friend of mine, praying medic, at the time I didn't know as well, but connected me to me through, I believe, Michael King, who is a longtime friend from the area originally. But he, so praying medic shared a post of mine, and I began really following along with a lot of what he was sharing at the time about the supernatural and that. And he had some podcasts, ironically, that he had began sharing about inner healing. And it was already an interest of mine, and it was already an area that I was feeling the need for in that season. And he started talking about parts and healing fragments and altars, and for some reason, when it's like, when something is for you to hear, and that was a moment when he began sharing about parts. I was like, and he started talking about, and essentially what parts are, or fragments or altars are, is when someone experiences trauma, when someone experiences like an area that is really impactful on their life, that traumatizes them, and especially repeatedly, but not always repeatedly. Even, like, for example, a child gets bitten by a dog as early childhood, and then every single time they hear a dog barking or a dog coming towards them, it triggers up emotions that even as an adult, they might be pretty on it, but when it's a dog, suddenly they're childlike and they're scared. And they may even almost act like a child because it's overwhelming. That's called a trigger. And those reactions are oftentimes a part of our soul. And I mean, if you look at, I believe it's Isaiah 61, it talks about the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news, and to bind up the brokenhearted. And the brokenhearted means shabar, and shabar means to shatter. So when we experience trauma, it's like a part of our soul, a part of who we are, is shattered. And it's not like it's broken, but it's like that memory, that experience, our minds, and the way God created our soul, I think, is beautiful, because he gave us the ability to, in that moment, take that experience and to separate from it so that we can continue to live our lives. And as a child, when we experience something like that, that part of us that experienced that may sometimes get pushed aside because we can't live in that fear for the rest of our lives, but it impacted us so much. And if it's not healed, it oftentimes will, we call it, dissociate from the rest of our consciousness. However, if a dog barks, then all of a sudden that part comes up. And it might not be like a child coming to the surface, but it's like that emotion of fear, and being like a childlike fear even will be right behind our consciousness. And we might be like, why am I feeling this way? But yet internally we're still feeling that. That is a fragmented part. And for me, going through a lot of trauma in my childhood, those parts of my soul that were really dealing with some heavy things would come up when I was in certain points of the week and certain times. And I really believe a lot of the voices I was hearing were the voices of my parts that were struggling. And although my who knows Jesus, the person on the surface is like, I know that I'm loved and that it doesn't matter what people think. It matters what God says about me, and my identity in Christ is, I know who I am in Christ, and I could say and declare these things, but yet there was still a part of my soul, a part of my mind, a part of my emotions that was struggling. And that's where it is so important when we are dealing with these things to face them and to really be willing to take a moment out of our lives and say, you know what? I am that strong person that knows who I am in Christ, but there's also a part of me that doesn't right now and is really hurting. And rather than rebuking them and trying to shut them up, I need to bring that part of me to Jesus right now and work through it.
Yeah.
And that's what I learned in those years. Well, from 2015 on, more recently, was the need to do that, to face those voices. And, sometimes we can go through healing. And I went through those years of healing and I sat there and thought, did it not do any good? Because here I am still struggling with these same things. And what I realized, a lot of it, it's like an onion, or I know my friend Matt, he talks about it being like a spiral staircase. There's layers to it, and you kind of go around it over and over again. And it's not because you didn't get healed. It's just that there's another layer. Yeah. There's something more that we need to work on. And even with parts of our soul, we can get a lot of healing, but sometimes there's a little bit more that needs to happen, and sometimes we have to deal with the surface before we can go to the deeper areas in our lives. So
yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too, because I have my own traumas that I've worked through, and while mine are different than your story and different than our listeners' stories, every single person has different things that have made them who they are. Yeah. And there was I woke up panicked in the night watches, like in the nighttime.
Yeah.
And it was a little part of me who was very, very panicked. And I asked Jesus if it was okay to engage with my angels. And Jesus said, absolutely. And so this little part looks up at my angel and gives my angel a hug. And the way that my angel was engaging with me was very similar to, whenever you have a great companion in like a dog, and that dog like looks at you, acknowledges you, loves you. It was it wasn't like a pet, so to speak. It was like a deep companionship of I'm embracing you and I love you. And even though we're different, there's still this synergy that was there. And at that point, my angel hugged me and I was hugging my angel. And then my angel led me to these rivers in the spirit realm. And one of them was, it's so strange. One of them was like, if you could get into liquid jello, like, how colorful it is. Yes. Well, it was like the frequency of amethyst, and it was the color of amethyst. And so we're literally swimming in amethyst, and then it turns to a different river and it turns into like this orange color, kind of like, I don't know what color it would be, like an orange gemstone. And at that point in this encounter, I didn't know what part Jesus was trying to heal, but it was specific to a specific time in my life when trauma took place. Yeah. And I know that because it was the color of my bedroom at the time the trauma was taking place. I painted my walls orange and the baseboards purple. And so
wow, that's great.
When the Lord is ready to bring things to the surface and say, okay, this is your stair step that you're on, You know how
Mhm.
many, there are so many times when I've done the inner healing work for that age
Yeah.
portion of myself,
Yeah.
that Jesus is so kind to say, here's another treasure for you. I want you to know that it's okay to engage. It's okay to
Yeah.
have these gifts.
It,
It's okay. And I want you to go back to this area, even though you've been here before. And I want you to release a little bit more of the trauma that's there, of the energy in your body that's trapped.
yeah. Yeah.
Emotions create energy. It's emotion, emotion, energy in motion. And
Hmm.
I feel like now we're at a time with inner healing and just physical healing, spiritual healing, where we have a lot more tools in our arsenal.
Hmm.
And Jesus is right there, just like saying, "Atta girl, keep going."
Keep going. Exactly. Yeah.
Healing.
And it's so funny. It reminds me before I even understood about parts and fragments and that, I was at my church and I had just had my daughter. So she was maybe my oldest. She's now 13. So she was like, I think she's like 6 months old, and tiny. And I had been visiting, well, no, that day, um, a family member was supposed to come over and she didn't. And I was facing some disappointments because I had that repeat thing happen where, they were like, oh, we're going to come help or we're going to come spend time. And then I'm sorry, I'm not feeling good. I can't come, and it, it was a trigger. It was a wound area that had happened repeated time, um, it, it's a pretty typical one that a lot of us have, but I went to church that night and I think I had left my daughter with my husband that night and I just needed some time away with the Lord after a day, it was maybe. And a pastor friend of mine came up to me and he goes, Susan, God wants to bury the hatchet with that family member. I'm not going to say who it is, just out of honor from them. But, when he said that, I just was out on the floor. And I mean, it's rare that like I'll go out on the floor. Like it was like someone knocked me over. But I went into this open vision encounter that it was like a memory, and it was a memory. And at the time, I had no idea about parts, but this was my intro to parts, even before I knew it. I was in my school bus and I was watching, but I was watching like I was on a video camera above, watching down, like from above to see what was happening. And it was an 8-year-old version of me. And I was running home from the bus and I could feel the anxiety because it wasn't good at school. It wasn't good on the bus. It wasn't good at home. And I was running home and I came into my door and my mom had been having a really bad day. And sometimes in that season when things were bad, she would get so angry and depressed, and she was not herself. I believe she had parts too that would come to the surface that were violent, not physically to hurt people, but just violent in their anger. And she was like, I can't be a mother anymore. I can't be a wife anymore. I should just kill myself. And she was throwing things at my dad. She was just throwing plates. And I remember her just being so violent, and it scared me. And I remember running past and running into my room and locking the door and hiding in the closet. And so that part of the vision ended. And I remember waking up from it and weeping. And I'm like, God, what the heck was that? You know what I mean? But it was like all this, the emotions connected to that memory were so strong. And suddenly it changed. And I saw Jesus walk through the door. And Jesus walked the same path and he walked past my parents and he came to the door on my door and started knocking. He's like, Susan, let me in. And I remember just crying and cowering and like, I can't, I'm too scared. And he's like, but I want to be with you. And I remember going to the door and trying to unlock it, and I couldn't get the door unlocked. I couldn't get it open. It was jammed. I'm like, it's jammed. And he said, you pull, I'll push. And I did. And the door swung open, and he just embraced me and just began weeping with me. And I remember I was tiny, and I just like in his robes, like just weeping and crying. And then like I woke up again and was just crying from this encounter with him. And the next part of it, like I went back into it as I was crying there, and he was like, okay, now it's time to go. You can't stay here anymore, and we we went out, and I didn't want to go at first. He's like, I'll go before you, but we're going to say goodbye. And I remember hugging them, and we, even to this day, we still do group hugs and kisses. So it was like I was kissing and hugging them with Jesus and saying goodbye. And as I was doing this, it was like suddenly I was older. I wasn't a child anymore, and I was leaving the house. And there was just such healing in that encounter. And it was something that the Lord brought in and just did in such a deep way, that it brought, I realized there was a part of me that was still stuck at my parents' house in that memory. And even internally in my heart was stuck in this place of hiddenness and fear of confrontation, fear of moving away from really hard things, and it was like he did something really powerful there, but I didn't fully understand it until years down the road when I was working through things again after hearing from Praying Medic about, the fragments and altars and that. And I, through a chain of events, met a good friend of mine, Matt, who began working with me. And we worked through some pretty intense things. And just there was such healing in those experiences, and it really helped me to just to overcome a lot of working through those parts that were wounded, and even later on down the road we revisited that place several times, because it wasn't just one part. There was multiple times that I was in that same place. So it's been a repeat, but it's like there's layers of it, and it's been so good to work through it.
Things that I just so love Jesus for this specifically. Yeah. You mentioned that you're at the door and you're like, I can't get it open, it's stuck.
Yeah.
How many times that literally is so resonating with people in general.
Yes. Yeah.
Jesus' response was, you push, or you pull, I'll push, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It genuinely requires us to have a little bit of skin in the game.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
That we can take a little bit of ownership of our journey and of this amazing existence that we have, even if there's a crap and a lot of trauma. But on the other side of it is Jesus and an embrace and a safety that brings so much, like just so much glory. And I don't say that in like a religious way at all. I'm saying that he moves us from glory to glory to glory. And we don't have to have our faces covered in shame at all. No shame to the trauma that we've lived through. It's layer upon layer, like you said. And I'm so thankful that Jesus showed you that, because now you told it to me. And I'm just like,
well, and I think the interesting thing is, through these years, I look back and I realize, something I learned early on was, when it comes to healing, when it comes to anything in our journey that's difficult, sometimes we can look at the big picture. We can look at healing. We can even look at our past and say, there's no way I'm ever going to heal of that, because it's just too much. But when we can look at problems, even in society today, some of the struggles we have as families. And, I could talk about several, which I'm not going to, but that I could say, oh, it's a mess. It's like I don't know where to start because it's just a mess. And something I learned was that we need to ask God, what is our part to play? And what do we need to turn over to you? And that's really been a big part of the journey, is learning to surrender what we think needs to happen to him, or surrender the things we can't understand or do on our own. And even in the journey of healing, I've at times had to let go of things, not necessarily because I didn't understand it, but because it was just too much in that season, and say, God, what do you want me to work on right now? And focus on that, and the rest, put it in his hands, and that's hard at times, because you feel like, well, am I giving up something that is a part of who I am? And it's like, no, that's still who I am. But right now, and I'm in a season right now that since August, I've really had to step back. In 2017, some of my memories came back from my childhood of some pretty heavy abuse. And it was stuff that I don't think even my parents were aware of. And with that came some trafficking. In my memories, I had memories of being trafficked, and childhood sexual abuse. And it was intense. And it was really hard to face those memories. I sometimes still don't want to believe it. I'm like, was that just a bad dream? Or was that something that happened in the spirit realm that wasn't real? And honestly, in every single case, I've learned I've had to give it to the Lord. I've had to turn it over to him and have him put the pieces together and weave out what's truth and what is, maybe it's not that it's not truth. It's something that was real to a part, but might not have happened physically. But there was a lot of stuff that there was, confirmation over and over of, okay, that was real. I'm not just making this up, or I'm not having a part dreaming this. It's real. And, facing those things, it's scary, but then there's also this part of you that wants to start investigating to try to find out, okay, did anyone else experience this? Has anyone else gone through this? And begins researching the spiritual side of things, even the trauma side of things, learning more about parts and fragments, and wanting to understand. And even that end of it, it can be tempting to begin to research. And in the research, it almost stirs up more than some people are ready to face. And, walking through the journey, at the beginning, I was I was so overwhelmed by what I was experiencing and what I was remembering that I was not functioning. I was not able to function because of how heavy the trauma was. And it was to the point that there were days I was in bed because I just could not get up, because I was at night reliving memories, and it came back pretty harshly. But, thankfully, that aspect of my healing journey came with me being surrounded by people that could support me. And I know not everyone has that. And I'm thankful I had that, because some people, they don't have anyone. But I had people in my community, people online that were in my community that I had been learning from, getting help from, and helping them help others, that could support me through the journey. And it was intense, and sometimes it was daily, sometimes it was hours of the day, just walking through the heaviness of unpacking the trauma and getting to a place of being stable and able to function for my family. And, I was thankful that I had people that could do that, so that when my kids were home in the evening, and at the time they were in school, so it was like, they, when they were at school or at night was my time to work, and the evenings was my time with family. And sometimes I could be a mom, and some days I literally had to hide in my room because I just could not, I could not cope, and I had to isolate to heal. And I'm thankful God surrounded me with people that could support me through it, and a husband who was patient through it too. And I'm sorry if I'm like jumping around too much here, but
You're doing amazing. I
think
had it come all out.
I think the thing that I was trying to get back to is those years of healing were really rough, and we aren't done. But when around the time COVID started and everything happened with COVID, it really shifted things majorly, because suddenly my kids were home all day.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the same time I had before to be able to work on stuff. And, we worked around it, but, it was tough. And my anxiety got really bad. I literally broke out in hives because I was dealing with so much. And on top of all the fear that was being broadcasted out in the atmosphere, it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Peace and the joy of the Lord.
Yes. Yeah. And I found, I think through that being a hard time, the most amazing part was learning and discovering something that helped me. And I use the term to be grounded, and not in like grounding your kid, but literally to ground myself, to keep myself calm. And that was literally, which I think a lot of us women did, baking. Sourdough baking, all those things was like, it was soothing to me to bake. I did kombucha, and I baked, and I just I found a lot of joy in that. And I could be going through a really tough time, but I had no choice but to get up and function, because my kids were there, they needed me, and I needed to be present. And it took that the need, that even in the midst of some of the hardest moments, my kids needed me, and I needed to be there for them, to really help my system to, as hard as it was, to take responsibility for my healing and to say, no, we are not going to go to bed, even if it hurts. Even if it hurts to get up and do this, we are going to step up and do this. And we did. And some days I did it crying because it was so bad. But what I found, the more and more I moved, the more I took my kids and we went outside and walked and we did stuff. Despite all the restriction, we went out anyway. We got out and we went to my friend's farm and collected eggs, and we were getting essentials at the farm and enjoying some friendship too. It was like
that is so, it's just so God, because in the midst of this global chaos, for someone who has gone through this internal chaos with fragmentation and all sorts of stuff, and you're doing this whole journey thing of working on the deep, deep things that no one even wants to acknowledge to begin with. For him to say, all right, I'm literally going to shut the world down, and I'm going to allow people the ability to engage with their humanity again. That is, like you said, so grounding. There's something really cool too. We've kind of experimented with it. It's called mud packing. And Chelsea Barlow, she does Mudwise, and she is mud packed survivors to root them back into their humanity. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant to hear them grounding to themselves, because what were we? It was dust. The breath of God went into the dust of the earth, and then Adam was created. And so rooting back into things that just bring out humanity and the beauty of humanity, that God literally just said, hey, I created these beings in my image. They're awesome. And so that is just really cool how you're saying these very normal things, but there's so much redemption and so much healing. You're saying we went to a farm and collected eggs. Why is that like trendy now? That's because we've been so dissociated, globally dissociated from just being humans. And then
we've been disconnected from the land we live on because we're so connected to the internet. And I really feel like this season has reconnected me. And it doesn't mean I'm not still out on Facebook, because I still have too many friends out there that I love to not get out there from time to time. But at one point I had to walk away from it because the fear, the confusion was so overwhelming. And I had to get back to my roots because it was there that healing was. And, you know, the other day I was talking to a friend, and we were talking about how, you know, Christians can be weird, and we can all have our weird things. And I sat there and I thought, these were my homeschool moms that are pretty normal Christian friends. I'm like, you think you're weird? No, I love that though. We can
what about us?
Yes. And I'm going, well, let me talk about it. No, I didn't.
I told you we'd be giggling in this podcast. Like, I literally knew that we would giggle.
I could go weird if you want. No, but I found God is bringing back into a place of normalcy, not to walk away from the weird things that he does, because he is a strange and an unusual and a fun, creative God. And he's put creativity in me and my kids, and I love that about him. But I am finding such joy in getting dirty and going out and being around the farm, and now a big thing for us is we ride horses. My girls, they've always had a love for horses. I've always had a love for horses, but we started lessons, and it's been such a healing thing for my girls and I. Sorry. It's just been amazing. Even days like now, you know, I could be in such a rough place. And I remember literally driving last week to the barn, and I was ready to have a panic attack in a car. I was walking through my breathing as I'm driving, and my kids, I can't talk right now. I just need to focus. Because they're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm working on it." You know? Right? But I was a mess because it was one of those days. I had emotional things, and you know, I've gone through lots of healing, but I'm still, I got my messes, you know, and I still have parts that are a mess, especially at night. Sometimes they're longing for help, and some of them aren't ready to receive it. So it can be a battle still. But when I got to that barn and just spent some time with my favorite horse, and I just hugged on him and cried, you know, it's like there's such healing even just in that moment, that I literally walked out of that barn feeling completely different and feeling healed. And it was like, I sat there and I was like, God, you're my healer, but this is so good. And something it reminded me of is how, you know, I don't know if you've ever read, and I highly recommend this to you or anyone else, is Brother Lawrence's book. It's a small little book called Practicing the Presence of God. I think you can find it online for audiobook for free out there. But I read this years before my girls were born. And he literally was practicing being aware of God's presence in everything he was doing. And his favorite time was washing the dishes. He was this little monk, and he would go and he would wash the dishes. And in those moments of washing the dishes, the presence of God was so rich for him. And he would take time. There would be times that he'd forget about it. And in that moment of forgetting, he'd ask God, he'd repent and say, God, forgive me for forgetting that you are present with me. And he talks about making the effort to be aware of his presence and everything. And something that he's teaching me right now is so much about how, these amazing experiences that I've had, and that sometimes he brings me into, and sometimes I feel drawn to step into, are awesome and amazing. But also what is awesome and amazing and beautiful is right here, right now, physically with my children, to be able to go and to watch them grow and to learn to ride. And last Wednesday, we went to Cowboy Church, which was awesome. It's our local group of it's a whole bunch of families, and it's supposed to be youth group, but it's like the whole family comes and they just ride. And my daughter was cantering, and she was so excited because she didn't think she could do it, and she did it. And it was just, the joy and connection. And it was like we had a little devotion, but it was more the fellowship and the connection that was so life-giving and so good. And I think there is something beautiful that I believe God is really bringing people into learning to connect there. And I've even been asking God, how does this look for other survivors? How can I help people that are walking this journey that I walked through, to not be afraid of the healing part, but also not be afraid to step through the pain, and to get up and to physically do something, even though it's hard, because there are people that need what they have. They need their love, they need their attention, but also to have grace on them to not be available sometimes too. You know what I mean? Because it is a journey. But my heart is one day to be able to open a place that I could have horses and have, whether it be tiny homes or something, that people can come and rest and heal and work through some of their trauma, but then to get up and go feed the horses and groom them and maybe get on one if they're brave enough, or just to sit there and cry with one, and just to realize that there is healing that can happen, and it doesn't have to always look the same, and they don't always have to go searching through heavy things to find it. That sometimes it can come in simple ways. And this is not to knock any of these bigger ministries that talk about, they talk about SRA stuff. I think people need to understand about trauma and SRA and I'm sorry, that's like satanic ritual abuse and trafficking and these things, and understand those things. There is a time to learn and understand, but there's also a time in a healing journey to be aware when it's becoming it's almost becoming a dependency on hearing from others to know how to heal, because I think God has beautiful ways for us to heal if we can find it. So
the theme of my podcast, at least right now, is spirit forward living. And when you were talking about the monk with the dishes and the water, I can guarantee you that water activates that guy's spirit.
He does. It really does. And you were talking about the ground and the packing, and one of the things throughout my journey has been I've had parts of my soul that have gotten a lot of healing, and in that process, for me, there are some people that believe once a part gets healed, they should be integrated back into the whole, and for me, it's been more like them experiencing Jesus and letting them and Jesus figure out, okay, now what is my part to play in my journey? And I found that some of them end up getting, completely healed, and I'm not aware of them anymore because they became more deeply integrated or a part of my consciousness. But some end up going down and I'm not fully aware. But then I find out like that a lot of them in the spirit realm were a part of something that God was doing. And one of the things that God showed me, and now I'm going to go on the weird side a little bit, but was that my part of my destiny was to deal with land, and the land that we live on. There's scriptures where it talks about, like, Jesus said it, if you stop yelling, that even the rocks will cry out. There is and it's scientists have discovered this, that rocks and minerals contain records. They contain the records of the land, but they contain life, and they also can contain not so good things too. And I believe that there's a lot of survivors that have walked in places that have become really rough ground and have become really rough, but I also believe those same parts of their soul that have experienced those things are the ones that can bring redemption and healing in that land. And I've seen that happen even with my own parts. The ones that were back in that room as a child, hiding and feeling trapped, were also the ones that got to go back and declare healing over my parents' home, and to be able to release peace in that place, that it's no longer a place of that memory. It's a place of peace, and even over nations and over places that we've, I think of the people that have walked through trafficking and have walked through it. It can be governmental, it can be related to different groups of people that are connected in the United States, organizations, without going into what they are. And those places, that land can contain the records of that, but it can also contain, going back to that scripture, Isaiah 61, it talks about he binds up the brokenhearted, and he releases those that are in captivity. He sets the prisoners free. And those are not just physical jails or, places of captivity. There are spiritual ones. And just like that part of me was connected and was trapped in my room as a child, was in a place of captivity, that there are parts of people that have walked through things that are still in places of captivity. And those that are walking this healing journey, whether you're a survivor of trafficking or you walk through some heavy trauma, you don't get just to walk through this journey just for yourself. You get to walk through this journey for your family and for every single person that walked a similar place. You get to bring healing in that area. And I believe one of the most powerful influences that, like, God has on this earth is the people that have walked through those things, that get to bring freedom to others, that get to set captives free, not just their own captives, but the captivity of other people, past and present. So yeah,
freedom for the whole grid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And a cleansing of the land. More horses and eggs and less trauma.
Yes, no more webs. Ooh.
Yes. Yeah. No more yucky stuff.
Well, Susan, I have loved talking to you. I could talk to you for forever, probably. I genuinely love hearing your essence come forward, and like your heart for healing and your heart for redemption and moving into the productive pain and seeing the goodness of God. That's always so edifying to me, and I know it's edifying to our listeners. So thank you for your bravery. Thank you for speaking up, and I just want to honor you for that. If people wanted to connect with you, how would they do that? What's your blog? What's your website?
You could probably, the best way would be just through either my Facebook, Susan Melanie Storm, or through mysticmamastorm.com is the other one. I also have a Facebook page for Mystic Mama Storm. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, blessings to you again. Thank you for chatting with us tonight.
Yeah.
I'm honored to have talked to you.
Thank you, Megan.
You're listening to Medicinal Minutes with Megan Mazinga.